Hello, Warhammer 40K players and fellow tacticians on the tabletop. Today we'll be talking about the Grotmus Detachment Questor Forgepact, which is under the Imperial Knights. And it's a little bit late to discuss this since a lot of YouTubers already have content about it, but I did want to put it into play first before I get into a detailed discussion about this detachment. So this detachment allows you to bring Imperial Knights with Adeptus Mechanicus as allies. The reason I play this detachment is that when I started looking into playing Warhammer 40K tabletop, I wanted to play Guard Super Heavies, and they're generally considered to be non-competitive. They used to be playable, and YouTubers like Morty and Glory won a few tournaments with Super Heavies. In one tournament, I believe he brought a Baneblade and a Shadow Sword, and he brought double Shadow Sword to a different one. But recently, they lost the ability to get orders, so I think they were pretty nerfed, even with their increased movement to 12 inches. So the reason why I think a lot of players believe that guard super heavies are not competitive is I don't think that they're bad, but there are other units in other armies like Imperial Knights that do the job of the guard super heavy for a similar amount of points and a lot better. So guard super heavies have amazing damage potential on ranged weapons, but some knights like Canis Rex and the Cerasus Knight Atropos have good range and melee profiles. And they cost similar points, have similar hull profiles, but the knights have very potent melee attacks. On top of that, the Canis Rex can use Tank Shock for free. He can actually use any stratagem for free. The Lancer can also use Tank Shock for free. So it's 1 CP you don't have to spend on Tank Shock that Guard Super Heavies would have to pay. And on top of that, in Hammer of the Emperor detachment, Super Heavies can go through walls for 1 CP, but Knights have Super Heavy Walker, so they can walk through walls without having to spend CP. They do have 1/6 chance to get Battle Shocked, but those are pretty good odds that you're probably not going to get Battle Shocked. And on top of that, the big knights like the Knight Dominus, so that's the Castellan and Valiant, they give a 6-inch aura that gives benefit of cover to armigers. So it's very similar to the Baneblade's ability. And knights also have a 5+ invulnerable save against range attacks that guard tanks don't have. And some of the knights have a 4+ invulnerable save, like the Lancer. And the Atropos has a 5+ invulnerable save in range and melee. So I think that they're a little bit more durable than guard super heavies, and they have melee options on some of their profiles, and they cost a similar amount of points. And that's why I think that guard super heavies are not competitive, and that's why I decided to play Questor Forgepact. I think that this detachment gives me a very similar playstyle to what I wanted to play with Guard. I get to bring a big horde of infantry, and I can bring a couple super heavies. And plus I get armigers. The Helverin and the Hydra are very similar in what they do. I think the Hydra's a little bit better because they have a longer range and they cost fewer points, but Helverins, they have anti-fly and they have a lot more attacks. The Warglaves are also cool. They're 140 points. You push them up and use their thermal cannon to do melt damage, which is similar to how you would play some of the Lehman Russes. Push them into the midfield and hit the enemy with Melta. So that's why I personally play Questor Forgepact, because I think that this detachment lets me play guard better. The reason why a lot of players don't play this detachment is that at the end of the day, it's a knight detachment, not an Adeptus Mechanicus detachment. And a lot of knight players don't want to buy and paint all those models. I surveyed people in one of the Facebook groups run by Jin Singh, and most of the players who don't play Questor Forgepact have told me it's because they don't want to bother painting a bunch of Skitarii, and I totally understand that. So, how I found this detachment was that I was actually looking at Adeptus Mechanicus because I love the Machine God. And I found that Adeptus Mechanicus is generally deemed difficult and expensive to play for new players, but Imperial Knights are actually easy to play because they have fewer data sheets. So a new player only has to learn maybe 3 or 4 different data sheets instead of 10 for different armies. And that helps simplify the learning experience. So that's one benefit of playing Imperial Knights. And it's also cheaper per point to buy Imperial Knights instead of pure Adeptus Mechanicus. And one interesting note is that I watched a YouTube video of recent statistics, and it seems that Imperial Knights have pretty good win rates, and they have pretty good number of tournament wins. And Questor Forgepact, as of the past week, has a 61% win rate. That doesn't mean it's broken because very few people play it, but it does show that in the hands of the few people who play it, it is a very viable detachment and it's not absolutely trash like some of the YouTubers who reviewed it when it first came out said. This topic finished, let's move on to looking at the finer details of this detachment and going over the different rules, enhancements, and stratagems that are available. And then later on, at the end of the video, I'll go through a sample list with some recommendations on knights to take and my strategy that I think that this detachment should be played. And I will also go over another strategy that Jin Singh takes, which is quite the opposite of my strategy. But the cool thing about Imperial Knights is that you could take 1 big, 2 big, 3 big knights, and as long as you know what you're doing, and as long as you have a way to score your primaries and secondaries and do what you need to do, it's all viable. And so here we go. And we're going to dive into Questor Forgepact today. The detachment rule here is Cogbound Alliance. Imperial Knight units from your army have the following the ability. Okay, that's a typo. Very typical of Games Workshop. But you know what it means. Sacristan Pledge. In your command phase, one model in this unit regains 1 lost wound. If this unit is within 3 inches of one or more friendly Tech Priest models, one model in this unit regains up to D3 lost wounds instead. So here are 3 things that are important. If you don't have any Tech Priests in your list, every single knight gets 1 lost wound right off the bat. The second thing to note is you have to be within 3 inches of one or more friendly Tech Priest models. And that means, well, it has to be within 3 inches of a Tech Priest model. But if you have 3 Tech Priests within 3 inches of a knight, it's not like the knight is going to regain extra wounds. So there's a certain point where Tech Priests become less valuable. And then the last part is the unit regains up to D3 lost wounds instead. So you don't get 1 wound plus D3. You get D3 instead of that 1 wound. This detachment rule is not as good for knights as you might think it is. You're gonna guarantee that you'll get 1 wound. You could gain up to 3 wounds, and we'll get into the numbers a little bit later when we talk about the Tech Priests. and whether they're worth it or not. So the other part is that Adeptus Mechanicus units from your army have the following ability. Divine Inspiration. Each time a model in this unit makes a ranged attack, reroll a hit roll of 1. If this unit is within 6 inches of one or more friendly Imperial Knights units, reroll a wound roll of 1 as well. So, this is for all Adeptus Mechanicus units. And I'm going to say it right in the beginning, right here. Vanguards are pretty damn useless. Rangers are better in almost every other way. They're cheaper, they get scout 6 inches, which is kind of important, and they also have sticky objectives, which with my strategy is extremely important. So when they're within 6 inches of one or more friendly Imperial Knights, you can reroll a wound roll of 1 as well, not instead. So you can reroll a hit roll of 1, and you can reroll a wound roll of 1. And this is not just one reroll. This is each time a model in this unit makes a ranged attack. So when you're firing with your Transuranic Harquebus, you can reroll a hit roll of 1. If you're firing your plasma gun and you roll a 1 on the hit roll, well, you can reroll that one as well as all wound rolls of 1 for all the weapons you have. This is a really good ability for Adeptus Mechanicus units, but the way I use them, they probably don't benefit from this too much. It's like, cool. It's a cool extra to have to help you plink off that 2 damage that you want to plink off, but it's not a game-changing detachment. So here are Forge World allies. There's a limit on the Adeptus Mechanicus units in your army. There's a limit on the type of units, as well as a limit on the number of points, total points that you can bring. So you can bring a Tech Priest Dominus, Manipulus, Skitarii Marshal, Skitarii Rangers, and Skitarii Vanguard. You can't bring Onage or Dune Crawlers, you can't bring the Cerberus Sulphur Hounds, you can't bring any of that. But, like I said before, the Skitarii Rangers are probably one of the best battle line units in the game. So here are some enhancements. Some are better than others. Omniscient Champion gives you 4 to the Bearer's Wounds characteristics. And it's for 30 points. It is the second most expensive enhancement. And I'm going to say, if you have the points for it, take it. You might be running a different list than I run, but the list I run is a very heavy stat checklist. It's like running a Castus Knight Porphyrion, but it's a lot cheaper. And the more wounds you have, the more wounds you have to repair. So Omniscient Champion is amazing. I would take it. Knight of the Opus Machina for 20 points. Imperial Knights model only. Each time the bearer makes a ranged attack, if the bearer is within 6 inches of one or more friendly Adeptus Mechanicus units, reroll a hit roll of 1. Now, note, this is not a Tech Priest. This is an Adeptus Mechanicus units. So if you have a Knight Castellan that is within 6 inches of a Skitarii Rangers unit with no Tech Priest, this still applies. It says each time the bearer makes a ranged attack, reroll a hit roll of 1. So this means for all your weapons, for all your attacks, you can reroll a hit roll of 1. Except for melee. It only works for ranged attacks. I run the Knight Valiant. The Knight Valiant has 1 Torrent weapon and a Thunder Coil Harpoon that hits on 2+. So this is kind of useless on the Valiant. Would you use it on a Lancer? No. What would I put it on? Probably the Knight Castellan. Because the Knight Castellan has some very hard-hitting ranged weapons. He has absolutely no melee that will make any difference in the game. And since he's purely ranged attack and he has a very long range with a lot of his weapons, this would be a pretty good enhancement for a Knight Castellan if you choose to bring him instead of the Valiant. Magos Questoris for 35 points. This one, you don't put it on a Knight, you put it on a Tech Priest. Any Tech Priest, a Manipulus or a Dominus. While the bearer is within 3 inches of one or more friendly Imperial Knights units, it has the Lone Operative ability. In your command phase, select one friendly Imperial Knights model within 3 inches of the bearer. That model regains up to 2 lost wounds. This is, on paper, a great enhancement, but you can only repair one friendly Imperial Knight model, even though you might be within 3 inches of multiple knights. You can only repair one knight every command phase that's within 3 inches. So is this a good enhancement? Both me and Jind right now think that this is a terrible enhancement because it's just too many points. Let's get to the last enhancement. So Vocifer Magnificat. It's an aura, it's 15 points, Imperial Knights model only. While an enemy unit is within 6 inches of the bearer, worsen the leadership characteristic of models in that unit by 1. While a friendly Adeptus Mechanicus unit is within 6 inches of the bearer, improve the leadership characteristic of models in the Adeptus Mechanicus unit by 1. I think that due to some of the Grotmus detachment, this is an okay enhancement if you literally have 15 points remaining in your army that you have no idea what you could apply those 15 points to. But in general, I think this is a total trash enhancement because if it gave you one extra OC, it would be really nice, but it's just leadership. To be realistic, and we'll go through the stratagems later, are you ever going to use a stratagem in a Knight's army on one of your Mechanicus units? Absolutely not. So if you're not going to use stratagems on them, then why the hell do you care about Battle Shock? Okay, OC. They're going to OC an objective. And now they're battle shocked. They can't hold the objective, right? No. You're bringing Rangers. Rangers have sticky objective. You hit the objective, you sticky it, you get battle shocked. Who the hell cares? And you have to be within 6 inches of the bearer. So most likely, you're going to have a knight on that objective too. And the knight has OC. So if your ranger unit gets battle shocked, like, who cares? And you're increasing the leadership by 1. There's a much better usage of 15 points. I think this is crap. Okay, so quickly, here's some stratagems. Omnissiah's Grace. Any phase just after a mortal wound is allocated to an Imperial Knights or Adeptus Mechanicus unit from your army. This is great because it's flexible. The Imperial Knights or Adeptus Mechanicus unit, you can target that. Effect, until the end of the phase, models in your unit have the Feel No Pain 5+ ability against mortal wounds. So, this is kind of like the replacement to Rotate Ion Shields. You could use it on Knights. And I think having a Feel No Pain 5+ ability against mortal wounds is really nice. I think it's a really good stratagem. On the Adeptus Mechanicus units, I think it's total trash. Not just because they're battle line infantry units, but because if you add a Tech Priest Dominus, right? Let's say you bring a Tech Priest Manipulus, right? You're like, oh, I really want a Manipulus. You could just pay 10 more points, get a Dominus instead, and your unit gets Feel No Pain. You could save a CP because a Tech Priest Dominus 70 points gives you this ability anyway. So the next one, I'm just going to go down straight, is Vengeance of the Machine Cult. For 1 CP, you can use it on any phase. It's very flexible too. 1 Imperial Knights unit from your army that was just destroyed, you can use a stratagem on that unit even though it was just destroyed. Until the end of the battle, not the end of the round, not the end of the phase, until the end of the entire battle. The enemy unit that destroyed your unit is marked. Each time an Adeptus Mechanicus model from your army makes an attack that targets a marked unit, that attack has the lethal hits ability. Going by my previous logic, well, couldn't you just bring a Tech Priest Manipulus? Absolutely you could. And if you want to bring a Manipulus so that you don't have to use Vengeance of the Machine Cult, go ahead and do that. Personally, I like the Dominus a little bit better because this, for 1 CP, if I used it, let's say round 2, let's say there's like some medium-sized target, like some Terminators or something that destroy one of my armigers. It's technically an Imperial Knight unit. Well, I could spend 1C. That Terminator blob is marked until the end of the battle. So any Adeptus Mechanicus model, meaning if I have 3 Ranger squads, all 3 of those Ranger squads get lethal hits when they attack that Terminator blob. So personally, compared to the ability of Tech Priest Manipulus, which for 60 points, he gives your unit lethal hits, I prefer using Vengeance of the Machine Cult and dropping the Tech Priest Manipulus. And the reason why is the Tech Priest Manipulus is flexible in that your unit now has lethal hits against any enemy it shoots at. That's great. But if I use Vengeance of the Machine Cult, now against one target, all my units have lethal hits. So let's say the unit with the Tech Priest Manipulus dies. Well, now you've lost lethal hits on that one unit, and none of your other units have lethal hits. Whereas if you use this stratagem instead, all your units have lethal hit against that one target. Now there's 5 rounds in a game, so theoretically, you could use this 5 times and mark 5 different units. And so when any of your Adeptus Mechanicus models attack any of the 5 targets you mark, they get lethal hits. I think this is a great stratagem if you're not bringing a Tech Priest Manipulus. And if you're going to bring a Manipulus, my personal opinion is bring the Dominus. So the next one, Bonded Imperative. Your command phase just before an Imperial Knight's character unit from your army uses a Bondsman ability. So you can't use a Bondsman ability and then say, I'm using Bonded Imperative. Theoretically, you have to declare it before you use the ability in your command phase. And this is an Imperial Knight's character. When selecting targets for the use of that Bondsman ability, you can select one friendly Adeptus Mechanicus unit within 12 inches of your unit, in addition or instead of selecting one Armiger model. Until the start of your next command phase, every model in that Adeptus Mechanicus unit is affected by that Bondsman ability. Restrictions. You cannot target a Knight Preceptor with this stratagem. So the reason why I don't use this is because I don't use my Adeptus Mechanicus units to deal damage. That's what the Knights are for. Your infantry units are there to screen. They are there to move block. They are there to take objectives and do actions. They are not there to nuke things off the table. They are there to take primary objectives, maybe do secondary objectives, and screen your big knights that have crap melee from getting tagged in melee. That's why I don't even look at this stratagem, because, I mean, the Castigator might be good because he gives bonus AP, but I really don't see this stratagem being used at all. So the next one's Machine Focus. You use it in your command phase. One Imperial Knights unit from your army. Until the start of your next turn, your unit can ignore any or all modifiers to the following: the weapon skill or ballistic skill characteristics of weapons equipped by its models, any hit roll or any wound roll made for it. So there are certain enemy units that give -1 to hit. You can pay 1 CP to counteract that. I would say it's a good stratagem. It's not going to be used all the time, but it's there for when you need it, and with some armies, you're going to need it at least once. I would say it's a pretty good stratagem. Next one, Aggression Begets Aggression. Your shooting phase, one Imperial Knights unit from your army or one Imperial Knights character unit from your army, and one friendly Adeptus Mechanicus unit that is within 6 inches of that unit. Effect. Until the end of that phase, range weapons equipped by models in your units have the Assault ability. Okay. I think this is the best stratagem in this detachment, and I will tell you why. Adeptus Mechanicus units don't get transports. Knights are not transports. Therefore, your Adeptus Mechanicus units are on foot. If you add a Tech Priest to a Ranger squad, they lose Scout 6. So that makes them very slow. You want to advance with your Rangers. You want to advance and get on that primary objective, at least in my playstyle. The Rangers are really slow. If you add a Tech Priest, they're even slower. The Scout 6 is nice, but in general, they're on foot. There's no transports. They are really damn slow. So you really want to be advancing them onto objectives. And they're screening for your Knights. And so the nice thing is now your Rangers can move up and advance and shoot. Your Knights move up and advance and shoot. Generally, I play the Valiant personally, and so generally with the Valiant and your AdMech units, you're gonna be within 6 inches. And if you want to get those nice bonuses from the detachment rule, you have to be within 3 inches of a Tech Priest model to regain the extra wounds. And if you have the Knight of the Opus Machina, you have to be within 6 inches of one or more friendly Adeptus Mechanicus units if you have this enhancement. And obviously, there's Vocifer Magnificat. If you do take it, you have to be within 6 inches of a friendly Mechanicus unit. I mean, you don't have to be, but if you want your units to take advantage of the 15 points that you just spent, then you might as well be within 6 inches. So you want to be within 6 inches anyway, so the requirements to use it is not that bad, and you can advance with your really slow Knights, and you can advance with your Rangers and get them on objective to sticky it. And you can also shoot with the Rangers, and unless the enemy has hidden themselves really well, your Rangers have a 30-inch range. And your Valiant, for example, has an 18-inch range with some of his weapons and 72-inch range with other weapons. And so, most likely, you're going to have some kind of target to hit. So having the assault ability is nice to rush that objective and also have the opportunity to maybe take one or two enemy units out. I think that this is probably the best stratagem in the whole detachment. The next one is Thronegeist Fury, and I think that this is the most interesting stratagem. And the reason why is that Index Knights in Noble Lands lost their ability to Overwatch. But this brings a kind of like a nerf to Overwatch back. So your opponent's movement phase just after an enemy unit is set up or ends a normal, advance, or fallback move. Target one Imperial Knight's Titanic unit from your army that is within 24 inches of and visible to that enemy unit. Effect: select one range weapon equipped by a model in your unit. That model can shoot at that enemy unit, and only if it is an eligible target. When doing so, that model can only make attacks with that weapon, and each time it makes a ranged attack, an unmodified hit roll of 6 is required to score a hit, irrespective of the attacking weapon's ballistic skill or any modifiers. Okay, so let me clarify something before I go into a little bit of strategy. Canis Rex has critical hits on a 5+, but like any other Overwatch, you do have to roll a 6 to hit with Canis Rex. Doesn't matter if he normally crits on a 5+, you have to roll a 6. So, what knights would best use this stratagem? Well, it's the Valiant and the Acheron, because they have a Strength 8 Torrent weapon that they can use. Should you build your entire army around this stratagem? No. Is this stratagem even good? This stratagem is actually halfway decent against certain matchups. So this stratagem is amazing against enemy MSU armies, like big horde armies. This is good against people trying to deep strike. Knights, they don't have as good screening as other armies. And if you're a new player, you probably don't even know what the concept of screening even is. Essentially, you don't want people deep striking next to you and then shooting you off the board instantly. Now, it's highly unlikely anybody can actually do that with something big enough to shoot an actual knight off the board, but this is actually pretty nice because let's say somebody drops Aquilons. Aquilons, when they drop, they can fire their sentry weapon. So if you have a handful of rangers that you really, really need to stay alive, and a bunch of Aquilons drop within 24 inches, let's just say within 18 inches, because Knight's Flamers are 18 inches, so they drop within 18 inches, and they're like, okay, I am going to blow your Rangers off the table. Wait, stop. You can overwatch them, and you'll probably wipe the entire unit. If you don't wipe the entire unit, let's say you have 2 CP, you can re-roll the amount of hits that you get, because the Flamers, they have very swingy number of shots. Now, the shots always hit, but the shot count is swingy. So you could wipe most of the Aquilons. You could wipe enough Aquilons off the table that whatever firing that they do is not going to make any damn difference. It's possible. So I'm saying this is a good use for that. Now, if somebody falls back, for example, let's say you have a Knight Lancer and you charged an enemy who's really shooty, and the enemy's like, okay, I want to be able to use my other units to shoot at that Lancer. Let me fall back. Or let's say it's Hammer of the Emperor, right? And it's a Rogel Dorn. They can fall back and shoot. So they're like, okay, I'm going to fall back and shoot. But wait, I'm going to overwatch you. And you don't have to overwatch with just a flamer weapon. If you really want to be super risky, you could overwatch with like a cannon and hope that you roll a 6. It's possible. You know? So you could overwatch them after an enemy unit falls back. So let's say you have a knight with a 48-inch gun. I think, let me check some of the units. I believe that the rapid fire battle cannon is 48 inches. I believe that. Let me check. No, the rapid fire battle cannon is 72 inches. And it has a D6 plus 3 shots, rapid fire D6 plus 3. So let's say that you have a knight with a rapid fire battle cannon, which, it has a decent potential to wound just because of the crazy shot count. You could overwatch with a knight with a rapid fire battle cannon from halfway across the board. So let's say you have a Lancer, you charge a Rogel Dorn. Rogel Dorn decides, I'm going to fall back and shoot. You could shoot the Rogel Dorn from across the map with a rapid fire battle cannon. And let's say the Rogel Dorn's on a handful of wounds, maybe 3 wounds, and you're like, I just need to land 1 shot. It's possible you could kill it and be like, ha, you died on your turn. It's possible. So this stratagem, I would say, don't build your army around it. Yes, I did bring the Valiant because it has a flamer, and it could take some use from this stratagem, but you don't necessarily need a flamer to make it work. A rapid fire battle cannon could possibly work as well. Something with high enough shot count where you could just finish off an enemy unit when they move, which means they have to stay still. And if they stay still, they have a lot of restrictions. So I would say this stratagem is not as good as aggression begets aggression, but it's probably a little bit better than Bonded Imperative, for example. So anyway, that is the Questor Forgepact detachment information. And so let's go look at Index Knights and look at the army rules. Now, one thing to note real quick is that in the FAQ that was recently released for Imperial Knights, Adeptus Mechanicus units cannot use the Doctrina Imperatives ability when taken as part of the Questor Forgepact detachment. So you can't take that. But Knights, do get their army rules because it is a knight army. So you can use code chivalric. Usually people choose lay low the tyrant. They never choose reclaim the realm. And I would agree with that. I would say get lay low the tyrant. Why? Because each time this model is selected to shoot or fight, you can reroll one hit roll and you can reroll one wound roll. That is amazing on the Knight Valiant because he gets one shot with this Thundercoil Harpoon. He gets a single shot. He hits on a 2+. So if you get a 1, well, now you got to spend a CP to reroll it. But not if you have Lay Low the Tyrant. You could just reroll it. So now, if you take Knight of the Opus Machina, you could reroll hit rolls of 1. But it's 20 points that you're adding to the army. And you have one shot on your Thundercoil Harpoon that actually matters. So on a Valiant, I would not take Knight of the Opus Machina. He has a Torrent weapon in one hand and a single shot weapon that has a 2+ on the other hand. Just use the army rule, lay low the tyrant, and reroll that. This is why I love the Valiant. Instead of putting reroll hits, I can instead put +4 wounds enhancement on him and make him 28 wounds at toughness 13 with a 5+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks. And since you don't want to be in melee, you're pretty much always going to have that 5+ invulnerable save. Anyway, there are also bondsman abilities, and I'm not going to go into this. You could watch any Imperial Knights video and learn about how to play the army rules for Imperial Knights. And then there's super heavy walkers, and then there are free blades, which doesn't matter because we're not playing knights in an AdMech army. We're playing AdMech in a knights army with a detachment. My build is all about the Knight Valiant and the other big knight, which is the Knight Acheron. And I'll go into why I chose those knights. This is not supposed to be, I'm going to go 5-0 at a tournament. I'm too new for that. This is more of what was really dirt cheap to get 2,000 point army. And so the Knight Valiant, due to the removal of Overwatch and the high points cost and the big model and slow movement, like so many factors, it's ranked as 3 out of 10 in some other people's YouTube videos. And I totally understand that in Noble Lands, this knight is complete garbage, but in Questor Forgepact, he's a little bit better. And the reason why I take the Valiant is because in the community he is generally ranked as terrible. He's very cheap to buy from the used market. And same with the Acheron. He is also considered to be one of the worst knights in the game. So that model is readily available to buy. And if you ask them for a discount, because it's been sitting up on the marketplace for like weeks and weeks, usually they'll give you a discount. Like it is one of the cheapest knights that you can get dollar wise for its point cost. And usually people say Adeptus Mechanicus is ridiculously expensive. I like Adeptus Mechanicus. I'd like to play Adeptus Mechanicus. And this is one detachment where I can play Adeptus Mechanicus through Imperial Knights and keep the dollar cost extremely low. So anyway, let's talk about the Valiant. He has a movement of 8 inches, toughness 13, save 2+, wounds 24, leadership 6+, OC 10, and a 5+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks. He is also a super heavy walker. However, he is also 510 points, which makes him more expensive than a Storm Sword. But is he worth it? I think so. What he could bring is a Conflagration Cannon, 2 Shield Breaker missile launchers, a Thundercoil Harpoon, 2 Twin Meltaguns, 1 Twin Siegebreaker Cannon, and Titanic Feet. Going back to what I said earlier, His melee is absolutely atrocious. He gets 4 attacks, strength 8, -1 AP, 2 damage, with a weapon skill of 4 plus, and you can reroll a hit if you want, but any dedicated melee has way better melee stats than you do, and even if you do survive, which you probably will survive against most melee units, especially if you have the +4 wounds enhancement, your clapback is going to be nothing. Now you're tagged, and you're going to have to shoot into combat or have other units shoot at that unit that just tagged you in melee, and only if it's another monster or vehicle. It becomes a pain when you're tagged in melee, so try your best not to get tagged in melee. And how do you do that? Well, it's not that hard. You have Ion Aegis, an aura. While a friendly Armiger model is within 6 inches of this model, that Armiger model has the benefit of cover. So if you bring Armiger Warglaves on either side, they can be within 6 inches of the Valiant and essentially screen out the entire front area of the Valiant where an enemy could come and attack you in melee. Because if you have 2 Armigers placed in front of your Valiant properly, they get benefit of cover, which is good against enemy ranged attacks. So if you have Warglaives and you're trying to charge up the board, they'll have a little bit more survivability against ranged attacks. And they are protecting your Valiant from melee attacks, because now they're either going to have to deep strike a bit against you, and if they do, well, you can Overwatch. Or they have to charge from the front and go all the way around your Warglaves, or they have to tag the Warglaive, kill the Warglaive, and then they have to consolidate into your Valiant. And you don't have to be within 3 inches to get tagged into after consolidation. Your Armiger has to be within 6 inches. So if you keep them at arm's distance, most likely you're probably not going to get tagged. Now, Overwhelming Firestorm is his other ability. In your shooting phase, after this model has shot, select one enemy unit hit by this model this phase. That unit must take a battle shock test. Okay, so it does not have to be your conflagration cannon. It's a little bit different from the Acheron, which has a very similar ability. The difference with the Valiant is you don't have to hit an enemy with a conflagration cannon to make them take a battle shock test. You could hit them with a missile launcher 72 inches away. Well, somewhere within 72 inches away, because a lot of boards are smaller than that. You could hit a unit across the board, make them take a battle shock test from across the board. It does not have to be your flamer. So that's kind of cool. Is battle shock that important for this army? No. Unlike the Death Guard detachment that makes the enemy take mortal wounds when they're battle shocked, this army does not really benefit from that. But if you know an enemy's trying to contest an objective or something, I guess it could be used. So the Valiant has a conflagration cannon, ignores cover, torrent. It's a very typical flamer weapon. It has an 18-inch range, which is better than a lot of flamers. It has 3d6 attacks, so anywhere from 3 to 18 attacks. Strength 8, which is really amazing strength. -1 AP, which is it's not that good, but you're ignoring cover, so it's okay. And you have 2 damage, which is pretty good. A lot of the smaller infantry flamers have 1 damage. This one has 2 damage. So if you are lucky, you get the 18 shots. You could be doing a crap ton of damage. Theoretically, you could do up to 36 damage with the conflagration cannon. Are you going to even get close to that? Absolutely not. It's okay. You can Overwatch with it. It's not bad. Twin Melta-Guns, the next one. You get 2 Twin Melta-Guns. It's Melta 2, twin linked. That means you can reroll the wound roll. Does that matter? Well, you do get to reroll a wound roll with your army rule, but it's nice that it has twin linked on the Melta-Gun. That way you don't have to waste a reroll for the Melta-Gun. You could save it for something else. And I'll get to that very shortly. The range is 12 inches, 1 attack, so you get 2 attacks because you got 2 of them. And BS is 3+. That's really good. That's That's pretty accurate compared to guard and compared to orcs, but I mean, everything shoots better than orcs. Strength is 9, AP minus 4, damage D6, typical Meltagun. But it's twin linked, so it makes it a little bit more reliable to wound, which means that they'll be on their save, and then now they're at AP minus 4, and then your damage is really swingy, so it's decent to have. Are you going to be using it a lot? Are you going to be banking strategies off of your twin Meltaguns? Absolutely not. But definitely, if something big gets in your face, or you get in something big's face, you could definitely use this weapon to hold enemies off. Next one, Shield Breaker Missile Launcher. And while I talk about this weapon, let me talk about the Twin Siegebreaker Cannon. You could take 2 missile launchers and 1 Siegebreaker Cannon, or you could take 2 Siegebreaker Cannons and 1 missile launcher. The Siegebreaker Cannon has statistically more shots, and the ballistic skill is the same, so you're going to hit more. And the strength is 6, AP 0, damage 1. So you're doing a lot less damage, and you're doing a lot less AP. It is blast and twin linked, so the twin Siegebreaker cannon is really good against horde armies that are really, really, really weak. But it's 36-inch range. I actually prefer to bring 2 Shieldbreaker missile launchers. Why? Because it is 72-inch range. It is the longest range of all your weapons, so why not bring 2 of them if you have a choice? You have 1 attack, BS 3 plus, strength 12, AP minus 6, damage D6 plus 1. Damage is swingy, but you do have a potential to lay down a ton of damage with this. It is anti-Titanic 4 plus, devastating wounds. Devastating wounds means that if you wound and it's critical, then the enemy does not get to make a saving throw. It goes straight to feel no pain. If they don't have feel no pain, they're taking damage. So what is this good against? Enemy knights, guard super heavies, which you'll never be seeing, and to a certain extent, they are good against demons that have invulnerable save, because you do have devastating wounds. So if you manage to critically wound a demon, then they don't get to make a save or an invulnerable save. Go straight to feel no pain. And so I believe that this is a great weapon. It has 72-inch range, so it is possible to first turn pop something like medium sized. So like an enemy sentinel, for example, you could quite possibly first turn pop a sentinel. You do get to reroll a hit roll, and you do get to reroll a wound roll. So if your strength is so high that you're confident that you are going to wound them, then you could just reroll and fish for that dev wound. That's what I would save it rerolls for. So the next one, the last weapon we're going to talk about is a Thundercoil Harpoon. Anti-monster 4 plus, anti-vehicle 4 plus, devastating wounds, 18-inch range, 1 shot, BS 2 plus, strength 24, AP minus 6, damage 12. If I'm going to reroll hits, I'm going to reroll hits for this. If I'm going to reroll wounds, I'm going to reroll wounds for this. Personally, this is how I would do it. I would fire the Thundercoil Harpoon first. So when I declare attacks, let's say there's something big that's almost dead. I'm going to hit it with a Thundercoil Harpoon and both my Shieldbreaker missile launchers. Most likely, it's going to be out of Twin Meltagun range. Most likely. And if it's a big tanky target that I want to take out, I'm not going to be firing my torrent weapon at it. And I'm definitely not going to be firing my Twin Siegebreaker cannon at it, because it's literally going to do nothing. So I'm going to fire the torrent weapon and the blast weapon at some other infantry. But if there's something big, I'm firing the Thundercoil Harpoon and the Shieldbreaker missile launchers at it if I can. I'm firing the Thundercoil Harpoon first. I'm going to roll. Most likely, I'm going to hit. If I miss, I'm re-rolling that hit. Then I'm going to roll wounds. A strength of 24 is double of every single unit in the game, except for another Knight Valiant class unit or anything bigger in terms of Knights and Titans, which you're probably not going to see anything bigger in competitive games. And Guard Super Heavies, probably not going to see it. I believe a Monolith, you're not going to be double, but you're going to be at least greater strength than toughness for every unit in the game, which means you're going to be wounding on 3+s or 2+ for most units. Even a Rogel Dorn, you're going to be wounding on 2+s. You're not going to have a problem wounding anything. So you have anti-monster, anti-vehicle 4+ on this, and devastating wounds. So since you have no problem wounding anything in the game, if an enemy has a very strong invulnerable save, and you're like, I really need this dead, you could re-roll the wound roll and fish for that dev wound. This has 12 damage. It's a very great use of using your rerolls for this weapon. But let's say they're out of range of the Thundercoil Harpoon. Or you've made a dev wound and you don't have to reroll that wound. Well, then you fire the Shield Breaker missile launchers. After that, if you haven't used your hit or your wound, you use it on that because you're less likely to hit. So off of 2 shots, because you're bringing 2 missile launchers, you're probably going to have to reroll one of them. And your strength is 12. That's about last cannon strength. And this also has dev wounds. So this one's another one to reroll your wounds for, so you can fish for those dev wounds. That's how I would use a Valiant. Okay, so now let's talk about the strategy with the Knight Valiant. I would give +4 wounds to the Knight Valiant, making him 28 wounds. At toughness 13, save 2+ with a 5+ invulnerable save. And plus you have feel no pain 5+ against mortal wounds that is in the stratagem that you can use. It makes this unit extremely tanky. And if the enemy doesn't manage to take it out in one turn, the next turn, he will regain wounds. A Knight Valiant is 510 points, right? Has 24 wounds. So let's do 510 divided by 24. Each wound is worth 21.25 points. So if you think about it this way, you get 4 wounds for 30 points. That is 7.5 points per wound. That is ridiculously cheap. And if it stays alive one more turn because of that enhancement, you get to use the Thundercoil Harpoon. You get to fire 2 Shield Breaker missiles. You get to fire the Conflagration Cannon. You might be able to fire the Twin Melt-A-Gun. And you may be able to fire the Twin Siege Breaker Cannon. And that means you could possibly make an enemy unit take a Battle Shock test. And next turn, your friendly armigers have benefit of cover. So the 4 wounds that you're buying at 7.5 points each, and since I use the word buying, it's an enhancement. You don't have to pay dollars for it. You just say, hey, I put it on my Valiant in your list. And you get to spend 30 points without spending a single dollar. So think about it that way. I mean, if you want to really go play Warhammer, it's not a bad use of points. It's not a bad use of dollars. And it's not a bad unit to put it on. If he survives, there's a hell of a lot he can do. And so you want him to survive. And I think this is great just because of the repairing ability. A Tech Priest now is worth 60 to 70 points. The Manipulus is 60. The Dominus is 70. Skitarii Rangers already have an invulnerable save of 5+. The 2 abilities that the Manipulus has is that the Manipulus gives lethal hits to the unit that it's leading, and once per game, it can give that unit a 4+ invulnerable save. So you're getting 1 more invulnerable save. So what does that mean? Well, anything that comes to the save, you originally have exactly a third chance, which is about 33.33% chance that your model is going to pass that save. With a 4+ invulnerable save, that's increased to a 50% chance. So you're increasing it a little less than 17%. Right? So the Tech Priest Dominus gives your unit a feel no pain of 5+. And if it's an Electro Priest, which you're not going to bring an Electro Priest, so I'm not even going to talk about it any further. But the Tech Priest Dominus is 70 points. It's 10 more points, and you get a 5+ feel no pain. Now here's the thing. Because you have a 5+ invulnerable save, when it comes to saving, you have a third chance to save your model. If you fail that, it goes on to your feel no pain. That means you have another third chance to save it. So having the 2 opportunities to roll, I believe, is a lot better benefit than having a 1 turn, 1 more invulnerable save. That's cute, but the Dominus gives it like permanently for 10 more points. That makes your Skitarii Rangers or Vanguard ridiculously tanky. And I'm going to say they are almost as good as Bulgrin. I would say the way I use the Skitarii Rangers is I use them like Bulgrin. You might not think that they're strong, but they are ridiculously tanky units if you add a Dominus to it. And the Dominus has an ability where if you're within engagement range of an enemy vehicle, you could do mortal wounds. So you could get close enough to charge in, use a Tech Priest Dominus's mortal wounds ability, and then fight. And you're probably not going to do too much in melee, but when the enemy claps you back, well, now you have an invulnerable save that's not just against ranged attacks like knights do, but they have a 5+ invulnerable and a 5+ feel no pain. So the chance that an enemy unit is just going to wipe you in 1 clapback, wipe 10 guys, plus a Tech Priest, that's highly unlikely unless they are a very specialized melee unit that has a lot of attack volume. Because Rangers have 1 wound. It doesn't matter if you hit him with 3 attacks for 10 damage each. It doesn't matter. You need to be able to land 10 separate wounds. Plus 4 wounds on top of that to kill the Tech Priest. So why would you ever do that? Because you have sticky objectives. You stick your objective, you move past, and then you can start move blocking. You can start tying up enemy units. That's why having these super, super, super buff Rangers are kind of nice. And you don't want them to die because they're going to be screening for your Knight Valiant so he doesn't get tagged in melee. So that's why I compare them to Bulgrin. Are they Bulgrin? Do they have slap shields? No. Do they have amazing melee attacks? No. But that's not what they're primarily for. Bulgrin are amazing in melee, but they're mainly there to contest objectives. And the Rangers, they could be killy. They have very nice special weapons. And for 85 points with a Scout's invulnerable save and sticky objectives, I would say they're pretty damn good for 85 points. And you get to put them with knights, and they get to get benefits from the knights and give benefits to the knights. This is amazing detachment. And I'm probably one of the very few people who think this is an amazing detachment. But Rangers are amazing battle line units. I think they are the best battle line units in the entire game. So that's how my mid board looks like. A Valiant sitting in the mid board, sitting in a lane of fire, and just parked there. Parked in a lane of fire where he can fire pretty much anywhere on the board. And he's there as an Overwatch threat in case anybody wants to come down and contest. And Deep Strike, he can take them out with Overwatch if any enemy moves really close, then he can even tank shock them. He can advance and shoot with one of the stratagems. And since it also works on a Adeptus Mechanicus unit, that unit can also advance and shoot. I think due to these detachment stratagems and enhancement, the Valiant has suddenly gone up in value. So that's my midboard strategies. What about secondaries? What about the other two objectives? What about home objective? What do I do? Well, the Knights have a very nice battle line unit called the Armiger Helverin. Yes, it is battle line, even though it's a knight that is like in between a Lehman Russ battle tank and a Hellhound. It's like somewhere between a Hellhound and a Lehman Russ. Well, it has a little bit worse save, but it does have a 5+ invulnerable save at range, which a Helverin is a range shooter. You probably shouldn't be going into melee. If you are going into melee, you either screwed up or you're using him to screen tactically. Helverins do not get super heavy walker, so they can't walk through ruins. They gotta go around. They have 12 inches of movement. This unit has an ability called Skyfire Protocols. While this model is either wholly within your deployment zone or within range of an objective marker you control, its Armiger autocannons have the anti-fly 2+ ability. So, what about home objective? Well, first of all, you're going to start Rangers on it. You're going to sticky the objective, you're going to move out, and you're going to have home objective the entire game unless an enemy deep strikes on it. And that's why you have your Helverin. Your Helverin stays close to your home objective. On the modern boards, they're pretty small. That 48-inch range, it's good enough for most purposes, and it's not indirect fire, but that doesn't really matter because it has a 12-inch movement, so you can stay behind the ruin near your home objective and literally walk around your deployment zone, blasting at things that fly, like Necron barges, or winged prime, or winged demons. These Armiger Helverins are amazing. Anti-fly 2+ is great against some armies, and if you're going to go to a tournament, you don't really know your matchup, and a lot of people like Star Shatter, and demons are pretty strong now, so you're going to have something that flies, most likely. The Custodes, I believe they have flying tanks. Eldari have flying tanks. The Helverin are great against those enemy units. So even if you don't have points to squeeze out, my recommendation is squeeze out some points and bring at least one Helverin. At least. If you can bring two, even better. Okay, so now in the strategy, we talked about our mid-board control with the Valiant, and then we talked about screening with the Rangers and how to make them extremely durable, like Bulgrin, and what you're going to do about your home objective. You're going to sticky it, and what you're going to do about your backline. And why I say bring at least one Helverin and two if possible is that if you have two Helverins, you can put him on either side of your home objective. You could put him in the corners and screen out deep strikers who are trying to steal your home objective. So the Helverins, they have pretty big bases as their knights, and if you keep them somewhere around 18 inches away from each other, you're gonna screen out almost your entire backline. And I say almost because you're still gonna have a little bit of gap, but it doesn't matter because if they deep strike something slow all the way back there, who cares? It's so far from your home objective. It's gonna take them a while to steal your home objective. And if they get like behind enemy lines or something, I guess they're gonna score. But if they don't pick up their unit with some kind of stratagem or ability, you can blow them off the board with your Helverins. So that's why if you can bring two, bring two. If you can't bring two, bring at least one. Because it does help with the flyers. it does help with screening the backline and protecting your home objective from getting stolen. Just because you sticky it doesn't mean that an enemy can just steal it. Yes, they can steal it. So you should probably bring a Helverin and keep them somewhere near the home objective. And now we come to the other two midboard objectives and the enemy home objective. What I like to do is bring a Kalidas Assassin. It's good in almost every Imperial army. A Kalidas Assassin is your action monkey for doing secondaries. So if you have location-based secondaries, just use your Kalidas Assassin. In a podcast with Steve Joel, a few other people, they do mention that a Kalidas Assassin shouldn't just be saved for doing secondary objectives. Now, in the UK, I've heard that you could go 5-0 and still lose a grand tournament because you don't have enough points. But for regional tournaments where you could go 4-1 and still possibly place, denying the opponent secondaries is a strategy. And one way you could do that is using the Kalidas Assassin to move block. You could place a Kalidas Assassin in an alleyway where the enemy wants to move. You could probably do that, or move it in front of the enemy so they either have to engage with it or they have to go around, which costs them more movement and keeps them away from tagging your big knights. So a Kalidas Assassin can be used defensively. If an enemy has infiltrate scout units and they are a fast army, you can park your Kalidas Assassin where the enemy wants to go, somewhere in the midboard. If it dies, it dies. You have just prevented 1,000 points from getting jailed. If you have 1,000 points getting jailed, and as slow as your big knights are, you've lost the game. Because this strategy relies on primary control. Very strong primary control, fast mobility, first turn, moving out. That's what it relies on. It relies on the extreme toughness of all the units. It is a well-known fact that Adeptus Mechanicus units don't do that much damage, but they're extremely durable. And so are knights. They are extremely durable. And if you have Adeptus Mechanicus with knights, with big knights and small knights, you have a force that the enemy has to reckon with unless they just jail you. So if you park your Kalidas Assassin in your deployment very well to prevent yourself from getting jailed, you have just saved over half your army from being rendered useless. So that's another use of the Kalidas Assassin. Some people refuse to bring agents, they refuse to bring assassins, but there is such a good use for Kalidas Assassins other than secondaries that I recommend everybody needs to bring a Kalidas Assassin. Everybody. It's, for me, in my list, it is mandatory. The first thing I put is Knight Valiant, the enhancement, Kalidas Assassin, and at least a couple squad of Rangers. And one Tech Priest. Manipulus. That's how I start my list build. And then after that, maybe I'll swap the Manipulus for a Dominus, maybe add a few more Rangers, maybe add some small knights to tailor my list. But in the beginning, the Kalidas Assassin is an auto include for me. I would say the Helverin is almost an auto include as well. Well, I would say most definitely it is an auto include, so you should probably include your Helverin. I don't go for 3 flanks. You just don't have enough bodies to do that. You could try going 3 flanks if you run a spam list, but I'm running a stat check. I'm bringing the biggest thing that is competitively reasonable to bring, which is the Valiant with +4 wounds. That is probably the biggest thing. And if you think about it, a Stampa has 30 wounds and costs 800 points. My Valiant costs 540 points. And you could be like, okay, well, you're bringing a Tech Priest too. Yeah, but the Tech Priest is not only benefiting just that one big knight, it's benefiting other knights that are nearby it. And it's also benefiting the unit that it leads. And it has some gimmicks. So the Tech Priest, you're not just bringing it to repair a knight a couple wounds. You're not doing that. You're bringing it as a big picture. You're benefiting a lot of things from it. And that big Knight Valiant, you're not bringing it just to punch. You're bringing it so that your armigers that are nearby it are getting buffed. You're bringing it so that its movement is very similar to the Rangers. You can advance and shoot with both the Valiant and the Rangers. It allows for a lot more aggressive and more flexible play. You also do have Overwatch. So if an enemy wants to try swarming you, you can also Overwatch them. So it's a very flexible unit that has a lot of uses, and it's not a one-trick pony. Now, the other knight that I'm going to bring to take one of the other two flanks is going to be the Knight Acheron. Would I recommend that Knight Acheron for the most competitive list? Absolutely not. I would actually bring an Atropos, but an Atropos is expensive in dollars and almost impossible to get. It is a very, very rare model. The Acheron, on the other hand, suffers from a low popularity rating, just like the Valiant. It is deemed absolute trash. I think it's like 1 or 2 out of 10 for Noble Lance. Why? Because it has a flamer that's really weak, just like the Valiant, but it doesn't get all the missiles and the harpoon and everything. It doesn't get all the goodies, but it only costs 425 points. And it has ridiculously good melee. Jind actually, he recommended, why don't you get a Charon? And I was like, I looked at it, I looked at the price for it, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm getting 425 points for a reasonable price, whereas the Atrapos is really good in Noble Lance as well. And so it's a very available unit for people to get, even though it is a Cerastus Knight. And the cool thing is that its carapace is exactly the same as a Castigator. So if you wanted to switch it to a Castigator because you don't like the Acheron, I'm going to say the Castigator's ability, the Bondsman ability, is probably the best one. It gives you better AP. So whatever's bonded gets better AP. So remember that bonded imperative stratagem I was talking about? That I will probably never use it. In my list, I will probably never use it. But if you're bringing a Castigator, now your Adeptus Mechanicus unit gets better AP. So the plasma and the anti-tank weapons have better AP. And your Armiger, like the Helverin, has -1 AP. Now it has -2 AP. So the Castigator has probably the best bondsman ability. And if you do get a Charon, you can always swap it to a Castigator as long as you have the right arm weapons for it. So that's why I would recommend the Charon. Terrible Knight, but it's available, affordable, and it is modifiable. The Valiant can be modifiable into a Knight Castellan. So if you don't want to play the Valiant anymore, turn it into a Castellan and play the Castellan. A Castellan is reasonably good in Noble Lance. Not a lot of people who I've been talking to do bring a Castellan, but I have seen some Castellans being played, and they are reasonably decent if you can prevent it from getting tagged in melee. It does a lot of range damage. So they're cheap, they're modifiable, they're playable, and they have some synergy. So the cool thing about the Acheron is because it has a flamer, you can use Thronegeist Fury on it. The nice thing about Cerastus Knights that I like is that they have faster movement than Questoris Knights. They cost a little tiny bit less than Questoris Knights in general. And they have crazy, crazy melee power. So what I would do is I would rush the flank. Which flank? Well, since I know what I'm going to do in the mid board, I will start deploying my mid board units first. And as a rule of thumb, from what other people have said, If the enemy has infiltrators, deploy your infiltrators, so your Kalidas assassin first. If the enemy doesn't have infiltrators, deploy your infiltrators last. If your enemy has scouts, deploy your scouts first. If the enemy doesn't have scouts, then deploy your scouts last. But there's also the deployment rule of deploy your big heavy units last. So in this lineup, we have scouts, an infiltrator, and big heavy units. So what should you deploy first? It's really up to you. Personally, I would deploy the Warglaves somewhere between one of the flanks. So although it sounds obvious to deploy the Warglaves first, because they're neither scouts, infiltrators, nor a big heavy unit, I like to deploy right in the midboard. And then later, you can see if the opponent goes heavy on one side. And if they go heavy on either side, and they still leave units on the side they're not going heavy with, deploy your Acheron and rush the weaker side. Just a rule of thumb. And if you want to get better at deployment, I would say that Warhammer 40k deployment is a little bit similar to playing Go, because in Go you want to deploy away from the enemy and try to take up as much board space as possible. But there's also that play of if an enemy deploys or puts a stone on a corner, you can immediately attack that corner and try to steal it from them. And so there are two strategies to playing Go. And in Warhammer 40k, there are also two strategies to deployment generally, where if you know you can really crush an enemy due to the disparity in your lineups, you can actually oppose the enemy's stronger flank and just try to crush it since you are a hyper elite army. If an opponent is deploying evenly, it doesn't really matter. You could deploy your Acheron on either side. And if the opponent has units you don't really want to fight, then deploy your Acheron towards the last units that you put down and put him in the weaker flank. Unlike Imperial Guard, that has Lord Solar Leontus, who lets you reposition units at the end of the deployment, Knights does not have that. So do beware when you go up against certain opponents that have units like Lord Solar Leontus that they could swap up their flanks. If they're going to punch up the middle, I am going to deploy more Rangers in the middle because my strategy is I need to hold the middle. Pincer movement might work, but here's the issue. The Charon has no real range. He is a melee knight. So if I deploy a Valiant on one side, a Charon on the other side, my Valiant can protect the Charon and shoot across the board with his missiles. But at the end of the day, I'm firing 2 missiles across the board. And the Skitari are going to be able to shoot their guns across the board. I am not going to be able to effectively overlap my flamers. I am not going to be able to overlap ranged attacks. If my Valiant is getting pounded to dust in one side of the board, my Acheron cannot make it to the other side of the board on time to save him. So I've literally just lost that flank. And the middle, possibly. That's why, if you're playing Valiant and Acheron, in particular, you gotta hold the middle. You've got to hold the middle at all costs. It's like a football. It's like playing football. You need to have a playbook. And one of the guard videos I watched, one of the guys said, I think it was a Joushy video. One of the guys said, look, focus on your army, focus on your strategy. When you get to a game and you read the opponent list and you kind of have an idea, make a game plan, make a battle plan. And I believe Happy Crumping Wargaming says that too. Before you move anything, make a plan. Figure out what you're gonna do. And this is general for all armies, not just guard. And what the guard player said was, my plan is better than your plan. If you have a very good plan, and it's gonna change. You're gonna have a different plan when you're playing World Eaters. You're gonna have a different plan when you're playing against Space Wolves. You're gonna have a different plan when you're playing against Eldari. You're gonna have a different plan when you're playing against Tau. The whole point is have a plan. Know what you're doing. Know what your core is, and know what your options are. Knights is an elite army. It is a hyper elite army. And what I mean by that is very few super strong units. Even with the addition of the Skitarii, it is still a hyper elite army. What hyper elite armies are good at doing is spearheading, putting a ton of points combined into one area and completely wiping the enemy off of that area. That's what hyper elite armies do, and what you should do is play into your strengths. Knights are very durable. Admech are very durable. This detachment is a very aggressive detachment. That's my opinion, and thus you should play very aggressively. If you don't, you're gonna lose on primaries. And you're gonna lose on secondaries because knights in general struggle with secondaries. They don't have units that can deep strike. They don't have units that can uppy downy other than the Kalidas Assassin. That's why I say bring a Kalidas Assassin. It is probably one of the best units you could take. And so you're really relying on that hyper board control. If you don't control that board, if you're not moving your knights and your admech out, you're not playing the army right. You can't camp in base and be like, I'm gonna win the game. You can't turn the game around. It's impossible. You literally can't. If you destroy all their units and at the end you pull things that you can't do, bring it down. Well, I've already brought everything down in the first 3 turns. What do I bring down? Assassinate. What do I assassinate? I've already assassinated everything on the board. You're not going to be able to pull back in points. If you don't get a strong base of primary points in from the beginning, you're not going to be able to pull it back on secondaries. If you blitzkrieg and manage to take one flank, you have set yourself up for being in 3 different quadrants. That is a secondary objective. Being in the enemy deployment zone, you could just advance into there. And if you do need to shoot, well, you could use a stratagem. If by turn 3, you have not made it past the middle of the board, you are in trouble. Anyway, that's my list, my strategy, and my opinions about the Questor Forgepact detachment, which is very unpopular. And don't forget, don't get tunneled vision into thinking, oh, I have to use Overwatch or I have to advance and shoot. Don't get tunnel vision because sometimes you might want to save your CP. And don't rush into a CP reroll because you might want to use Tank Shock. You might want to save your CP because if an enemy unit destroys your Imperial Knight unit, you can mark him and your Mechanicus models get lethal hits. If you don't have any good lines to advance and shoot on your first turn, I would probably save your CP for a later turn and then go all in. If you know that an enemy has devastating wounds on their weapons or they're going to come and tank shock you first before you can tank shock them, right? They're going to come and tank shock you first. Well, you could save a CP so you could use it reactively. So There are, let's see, there are two stratagems that are to be used proactively, and then there are four stratagems that you use reactively. And so don't be eager to waste all your CP on stupid things like rerolls, because you may have to use some of that CP for defensive stratagems. Now, Jin, he plays, I believe, a Canis Rex or one Big Knight, and then he brings Armiger spam, and he also brings Ranger spam. He brings 5 squads of Rangers and one Skitari Marshal. He refuses to include agents in his list. His strategy is very MSU. He has a lot of bodies to do actions. He has a lot of bodies to do objective control. Instead of putting a lot of eggs into a few baskets, he's putting a lot of eggs everywhere. And that is definitely another strategy that you could use. His Skitari Marshal actually is not attached to a ranger unit. Why? Because he wants scouts on all his rangers. He puts his marshal in reserve separately from the rangers, and he uses his marshal to do secondary actions by bringing him in from strategic reserves. And a marshal, he kind of uses it like a lone commissar. Even though a commissar costs 30 points and a marshal costs 35, he kind of uses the marshal like a commissar. And it looks like it works pretty well, but then again, he's an experienced player and he knows his list very well and he knows what he's doing. So that's how he plays. He does not bring any enhancements. You cannot put enhancements on Canis Rex because he is an epic hero, and he does not bring a Tech Priest, so he cannot use Magos Questoris on it, which is the repairing wounds enhancement. So instead of using the detachment for its face value, which it looks like you're repairing knights, you don't have to play that way. You could just bring rangers and just put so many bodies on the board. Armigers, rangers, and one big knight, and dominate the board like that. You're banking on the fact that hopefully you can keep the middle objective sticky until the end of the game and take out enough units and have them misposition their units so that they can't take the middle objective back and have enough turns to beat you on score. And remember, you also have another flank. So if they're focusing fire with all their units from across the board to kill one Valiant, well, you're in for some good news. That means they're not firing at the Acheron. Maybe they're not firing at the Rangers, or they're not dedicating enough firepower to fully kill the Rangers. Now, we're not Necrons. We don't bring Ranger models back. We're not like Old Guard where we can bring whole units back. But if they can't kill a whole squad of Rangers, they can still screen the opponent from deep striking and from getting onto an objective and stealing it. So if you're positioning your Rangers maybe 4 inches in front of the objective, maybe they kill you. But you are, as Jin would call it, a speed bump. If you delay them 1 turn, you have 5 points or 4 points or whatever the objective point cost value is, and they are missing out on 4 points. They're missing out on 5 points. If you do that 1 turn, that could be a 10-point differential. That could win you the game if you keep that objective 1 more turn. That's why sticky objectives are very important, and not dying is also very important. And the cool thing about Rangers with the Dominus is they're going to be in front of the Valiant. If you're afraid that the Valiant is going to get attacked, the Rangers with the Dominus, you could just charge them in and engage in combat. You get fights first. And if it's a vehicle, you can drop mortal wounds on it. Since your charge phase is after your shooting phase, you can soften that unit up with your Valiant. You can soften it up with the Ranger shooting. Because if you're going to make a charge, you're within range to get rapid fire on your rapid fire weapon. You soften it up, you charge right in. Now, next turn, they're engaged. If they can't kill you, and most likely they're not going to kill you because you have 2 layers of save and feel no pain. You have 2 layers of that. Plus, you have 14 wounds because you have an attached Tech Priest Dominus. They have to finish you off next turn. You have bought time. And in this game, standing on objectives, or not standing on objectives, but preventing your enemy from standing on objectives is how you win the game. So that's how you have to do it. You have to rush up the board. You have to sticky the objective first, move past the objective, and make speed bumps. If you can't make it to the objective, if you get jailed, you lost the game. So could this detachment be horribly bad? Yes. If you don't have the balls to move up and take risks and take damage, you will not win games. If you have balls and if you charge your units in, well, not charge, but if you advance, you have to advance. This detachment, if you're not advancing, you are not going to have enough movement to get into range. You have to advance and shoot. That aggression begets aggression. Expect to use it at least once in a game, even twice in a game, maybe. Maybe you use it in the middle, you use it on a flank, maybe. You could be using this once or twice in a game. If you're not doing that, say goodbye to your victory. You have lost that game. You are advancing and shooting. You're getting onto that objective. That's what you're doing. So anyway, I can beat the dead camel even more, but I'm not going to do that. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you have some ideas and at least 2 different strategies on how to play this detachment. Your lineup choices for big knights could be different, and I completely recommend that you don't take an Acheron if you can manage to. But if you are just getting started with this game, if you're getting started with AdMech, if you're getting started with Knights, this detachment might be something interesting. If you're going from Knights to AdMech or AdMech to Knights, and you already have some of these units, it might be a decent detachment to try out. I highly recommend that a lot of people do try it out before they make a judgment on how good or bad it is. I think that this is a great thematic detachment, and it looks like Jind is already kind of making it semi-competitive. Since a lot of people are experienced with Noble Lands, it's going to take some time for this detachment to look good enough to be noticed, because this is kind of a new thing. But once people start playing it and figuring it out, I think it's just as good as any of the other detachments, to be honest. You're taking different units and you're playing different strategies. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. If you got any questions, if you got any comments, then feel free to question or comment down below. And if you'd like to support the channel, you are very much encouraged to like and subscribe. Very shortly, I will be creating a Patreon because I would like to make some extra money to try out different lists and builds and make more content for your viewing pleasure. So sometime I will add that to the description when I figure that out. And I hope that you guys have a great day. And if you are a tournament player, good luck at your next tournament. And if you are a casual player, then I hope that you will have fun in your next casual game or narrative game. And with that said, until next time.